In this series of programs, The World of Art, we have both discussed and tried doing many different and varied ideas in art, but none quite so controversial as abstract painting. It's an expression of our present-day mode of living. It's the kind of thing we're seeing in museums. It's the kind of subject matter, or lack of subject matter, that people are discussing. But do we understand it? Why do we dislike it, or why do we like it? Now, in looking at the painting which I've done here, you note that, first of all, it is a series of light and dark values in strong contrast. Dramatic light against dark. I look for subject matter. There isn't any. A painting, does it have to mean something in particular? Does it have to be a landscape, or a person, or a portrait? Or can it be design pure and simple? This one was named after the painting was completed. I call it Totem, simply because upon completion of the picture, it seemed to suggest a totem pole to me. Now, it may suggest something else to you, and of course you are permitted to interpret it as you see it, because it is the intellectual kind of interpretation that we wish to have when we look at a picture, rather than looking at one and saying it's a dog lying on a cushion or a person seated in a chair. Now, how do we go about beginning an abstract painting? Since we, in this series of programs, are interested in having you try a variety of art experiences, suppose we take some materials and try doing something. These are definitely only experiments. They are nothing profound, but little things that we might do that will help us to understand the problem of the artist in starting a painting or a piece of sculpture. Now, from this piece of paper, I'm going to design an abstract, but not with brush or pencil, this time with string. Taking a piece of string and allowing it to be submerged in a bowl of black paint. You notice that I curve the string around inside the bowl so that it doesn't tangle, or at least I hope it won't tangle. The string may be long or short, depending upon the amount of turn and twist you want your design to have later on. The thing we try to avoid, however, is tangling the string and causing it to knot, and then we have to start over again. Now, once your string is placed within the bowl itself, with a brush, I submerge it in the paint. There. Now, pulling it out, I'm letting the string arrange itself on the paper. I do, however, want to cover the surface with design, certainly not a tight type of design that we would ordinarily find, but one that is irregularly placed to create interesting divisions of space. Now, that string is coated with paint, as you notice. But taking the end of it, I'm going to drag this string in different directions, so that because of this dragging motion, the width of the string causes some wide areas of design. I pull it downward because that part of my paper seems to be empty. It's creating a line effect as well as a texture. Now, you notice I let the string drag to the very end. Now, you note that you have an abstract design, very simply done. I could take another string, dip it into a lighter color, do the same thing, another string, the same thing. I might take paint and add paint to it using a brush. because of the experimental quality of modern art, we must think up our own ideas, our own methods of working. With another piece of paper, removing the first drawing, I put this to the other side of the desk and take the new materials I'm going to work with. This time, I have a piece of glass and printer's ink. Now you notice I'm rubbing the printer's ink over the glass because I need quite a large quantity of it. I want it to be heavy. I want the ink to be tacky. Then with the roller or brayer, and you probably can hear the sound of the ink adhering to the brayer, you can see that the ink itself is tacky. I use the brayer in several directions to have an even surface of ink over the glass. Again using string, but using it in an entirely different way. I arrange the string in irregular fashion. Now, there isn't any one way of doing this, so you can try your own method of the string arrangement. Taking my brayer and starting over the string, you note that the string begins to roll around the brayer. As I go back and forth over the ink, the string is coated with ink. Now you might wonder what this is going to do. Over the paper, you find that you have a wide area of shadow and also a very fine linear effect achieved through the use of the string wrapped around the brayer and rolled in ink. Going in the opposite direction, I have a design that is more complicated, but I think more interesting too. Now, the way you arrange this is up to you. But it does create a design that has no meaning insofar as subject matter goes, but it certainly does create a piece of decoration. Your thin lines and your wide lines, all done with string and done with a great deal of freedom. Let's suppose we try a third idea. This time, we're going to use 2 containers and paper. Starting with white, we're going to cut designs. Some large, some small. After all, in a picture, we do want variety of spaces. We want a variety of forms and shapes in combination. With some black paper, I'll do the same thing. Now, when you work with cut paper, and cut paper that is pasted to a background, we call these pictures collage. And there are many, many different types of collage. You can make them so that corrugated cardboard, sandpaper, and various other kinds of materials are used. Now, taking these pieces of paper, I'm going to arrange them on this background. One shape overlaps the other. Some will join together to create an interesting pattern, an interesting continuation of design. Adding the black areas black forms, the black shapes. I can arrange them carefully or just scatter them and then rearrange them as I find a need for them. Because I do want my design to complete an idea, a feeling of balance, a feeling of being well planned. And so I can spend more time arranging these since they are made up of single pieces of paper that are not fastened but can be adjusted and moved to create a design. Then, with this finder, I'll place it over these different shapes. Now, how does it look best? Like this? If I push to one side, is that an improvement? Continue to move it. Now, finally, deciding upon an arrangement, I have created an abstract. I've created a design that to me is interesting to look at, but does not have any subject matter. Again, using another material, another medium, this time a crayon, I might just start to add lines. Now, these lines are in contrast to the exact shapes that were cut from paper. This little experiment is fun to do. You may find that at home you'll find that it's interesting too. I can go on still further. I could fill in certain areas if I chose to, or leave it go as is, depending upon the effect I want. And naturally, my effect will not be the one that you will achieve, because it is an original piece of work, and yours, too, must be original. Now, how do artists use these ideas in a completed picture? That's always the thing that we must look for. How can an artist begin with the simple materials and without anything to look at or anyone to tell him exactly what to do, and begin to compose with the materials at hand and create a piece of artwork? We have several prints here that I feel certain will interest you. The first one is called Geometry by Bill Libby. I don't think there's any question why he calls his print Geometry. It has mathematical exactness. It has that feeling of being extremely well and accurately and carefully planned. You find no form, no shape that has been done without the use of an instrument. There is no freehand drawing here, but a tremendous amount of thinking. The width of one shape in relation to the other, the flat areas in relation to the shaded areas, the light areas in relation to the dark areas. All these different forms have been thought out to create a very mathematical, precise, well-planned composition or abstract, which he calls geometry. Organization is somewhat similar. It's by Russell Twiggs. It's a serograph, a print, but just as well organized, just as carefully and exactly organized as the one you saw before called geometry. Because mathematics does enter into modern art. Science enters into modern art. The fact that we are living in a different era, the era of the atomic bomb, the era of great scientific research, the area of air travel, all those things begin to affect our method of expressing ourselves. We don't express ourselves the way Michelangelo or Raphael did. Theirs was typical of the age in which they lived. Ours, of course, should express our own way of living. Low tide is the next one. You note here there is a looseness to this that you did not find in the two rather mathematically arranged compositions before. Here you find it's a woodcut. And the hand in cutting the wood before the printing wavered. It was not restricted to the use of exact instruments which prevented a movement to the right or the left. But the flow of the hand itself became part of the design as the artist cut the wood away. You find In the background, a light color, the middle ground, the second layer of paint was a darker tone, and finally this calligraphy of continuous lines. The darkest tone is overall the two other layers of color and design. Do you see low tide here? There's no reason why it has to be a literal translation of low tide. This is low tide to the artist. This is the way he feels about the subject and therefore expresses himself with great sincerity. Hills and Pine by Zortich is pretty much the same idea of stylization of design, of an idea carried from the real idea, the naturalistic idea, into a pattern that is almost abstract. You note in the background these hills arranged so that there is a relationship of shapes and forms, arranged so that the eye is carried about the composition within the frame. Then over that, your overlays of forms that suggest pine trees. Then, too, the addition of textures, rough and smooth, the pattern of dark and light, giving you the effect of hills and pines, but certainly not hills and pines that we know, but the artist's impression of the way he feels about hills and pines. It's rather interesting to note how a subject such as hill or tree, in this case pine, can start out as a real visual experience and realism and end up by being something as semi-abstract as this. It's quite a change, isn't it? But how would you begin? If we look at the still life, which we have set up here, you will note that you have a little Victorian table, a table with an onion placed upon it, a white pitcher, a vase, and in the background, a piece of newspaper and a striped cloth. There are reasons for making these selections so that you have variety of shape, variety of form, you have overlap, and above all, a starting point for a design. But how would the artist do it who doesn't wish to work in complete realism? A camera might take a photograph of this and give you the idea exactly as it is. The artist will take this subject as he sees it here, and then to that subject give his own or supply his own mental interpretation. His interpretation will be entirely different from mine. I start here by first drawing a vase. Now you're going to say, how do I see a complete circle for a vase? Well, I don't see it from where I stand. But if I were to be above that vase looking down, I would see that. I know that shape exists. So I'll put it there as part of my design. Then I carry the side of the vase. Well, the side of the vase in the real one is not flat. But I find that if I use this side flat and the other side curved, I achieve a design that to me is more interesting. I may supply the other side through the use of a curved line within the shape, or even a series of curved lines. Perhaps you don't see the vase that way, but it's another way of looking at it. The picture which you see can be drawn somewhat in this fashion. Again, it is one way. The bottom of the picture becomes a circle. I'm more interested in one shape placed against the other in an interesting fashion than I am interested in having a real picture against a real vase. Do you recognize this as an onion that has begun to grow? Whether you do or not is unimportant so long as one shape is interesting placed against the other. What about that table? We know, of course, in the real table it's round. But for my purpose, a half round is more interesting. The base of the table would naturally be in the center, but I feel that if I place it to one side, it's more to my liking than having it exactly placed in the center. One foot I raise above the other. I might use a repeat of that shape. In the background, the piece of printed newspaper becomes that. The cloth stretches across. I can begin to show folds, but certainly not folds that are complete realism. The stripes of the cloth will create a breaking of space that adds interest to the unbroken area. And so I have a still life begun by looking at a real one and developed into something quite different, the way I feel about those subjects. Now, with the use of some mass, the forms begin to clarify themselves. And I place the masses, the dark and light pattern, so that I have a balance and an interest. Using a darker chalk, I re-emphasize some of the forms that had been previously drawn. You may have seen pictures done in a rather cubistic style by some of the very famous artists, such as Gris or Leger, various other people who work in this particular style. But it's a far cry from the still life that I had started with. But you notice that textures become so important. Textures, too, are found in nature. In looking at the photograph here, which is a mushroom, but looking up at the mushroom rather than down at it, as we generally do on a steak, you find that these little lines, textured lines, add tremendously to the richness of the surface. These can be used in painting. From the mushroom, we begin to travel by air, look over the edge of the plane and down, and we see these patterns, the topography of the land, the tops of buildings, the use of streets, the use of a variety of textures that you find in the mountains and in various other places along the surface of the earth. And these give us ideas for paintings too. This is again part of our influence, the influence that we're reacting to, this scientific age, this age of speed, this age of hurry. It's showing in our pictures. Note the dark pattern of the earth, the tops of the buildings, which are much lighter, and the way these forms hold together. Naturally, in life, we find that there is a certain organization to things that happen. Do you recognize these forms? At first glance, they look like pure design, but they are milkweed pods. That is the seed from the milkweed pod that has been moved about and begins to strike a real design. Any one of us who has taken a walk in the woods, you look at the earth's surface, you find pebbles in various sizes, dark, light, some curved, some rather even, some angular, but arranged by nature in such a way as to create a pattern. It is an abstract, but an abstract that we had absolutely nothing to do with. Nature has given us that. But we do take our influences for painting from subjects of this kind that we see every day. I know you wouldn't recognize that because it happens to be a sunflower showing the center with its thousands of seeds. All these little seeds creating a rather involved kind of texture. Then, too, you find that in spite of the fact that those seeds are multitudinous in number, there is a tremendous variety in size. Also, you find that even though it is suspended over a great surface, you find a shading around the edges in contrast to the light, which creates a picture. But how does the artist begin to use these? One sign, I think, one of the typical uses that the artist puts texture to is in the abstract or non-objective painting. He tries for the richness of surface. Now, the first painting we will see is by Anderson, and he calls this organization. Actually, an abstract must be tremendously well organized. Here you find the breaking up of background spaces into dark and light, the use of masses of color and thin lines delineating those various areas of color. This tremendous form, a rather organic form, a form showing growth, is in contrast to the rather symmetrical mathematical shapes that you find in the background. But as you survey the picture, there are many little sensitive parts to it that you may not see at first glance. You note here the use of thin lines, lines that in some ways suggest the use of a very thin brush or even poured paint, as can be done in some cases of the abstract picture. I doubt that we should call that a plant. I think that's purely accidental. But if you see a plant in that picture, that's fine. Somebody else may see something else. Now, Howard Bayer, who did the next painting, shows you an entirely different kind of picture. You may recognize it if you have spent any time at the coast. But this time, using blocks and a less exact technique, you have the complete idea of a coast done in a semi-abstract manner. Now, we've merely touched upon the idea of abstracts and non-objective pictures. Why don't you try doing some at home, using your own ideas?
The World of Art features Joseph Fitzpatrick, well-known Pittsburgh artist and art supervisor in the Pittsburgh Public Schools. This has been a presentation of the Educational Television and Radio Center. Produced and directed by Sam Silverman. Technical supervision, Frank Stuffman. The World of Art has come to you from WQED in Pittsburgh. This is National Educational Television.